Hey, welcome back. Um, did Jesus predict Jerusalem's destruction in 70 CE? In the books of Mark, Luke, and Matthew, we read that Jesus said that Jerusalem would be surrounded by encamped armies, that they would completely desolate the city, and that the temple would not have a stone left upon a stone. Now, in this video, what we're going to do is look at two strands of evidence that strongly indicate that Jesus never made that prophecy at all, and that it was later added by people attempting to prove that Jesus was the Messiah and that he had the gift of prophecy. The two lines of evidence I'm going to go through are the other Bible writers in the Greek Bible or the New Testament, and a Christian apologist called Justin Martyr living in the middle of the 2nd century who was attempting to defend Christianity and establish Jesus' credentials as the Messiah. In Mark 13, Matthew 24, and Luke chapters 19 and 21, we have Jesus say that the temple in Jerusalem would be completely destroyed. Luke explains that the city would be encircled by armies and completely devastated. Now, the city was destroyed in 70 CE. That is not disputed. Isn't it very interesting that no other Bible writer mentions this prophecy at all? The Apostle Paul was constantly stressing just how close the end was. You'll also find references in 2 Peter and in 2 Timothy, even where it's explicitly talking about the last days, how super close the end was. Now, two of these books, Jehovah's Witnesses believe, were written 6 and 5 years before Jerusalem's destruction. Now, if these were inspired works, surely God would have included a mention of Jesus' prophecy here. But there's nothing. No other Bible writer seems to be aware that Jesus made these predictions. Even the book of the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and the book of Revelation are admitted by witnesses as being written after the destruction of Jerusalem. Not a single mention about its fulfillment. In the Gospel of John, you would imagine that John could at least include one line about that. Jesus predicted the destruction of Jerusalem. I was there, I heard it myself, and it happened just like he said it would happen. Not a single mention at all. So the very fact that all of the other Bible writers, even ones who were stressing that the end was imminent, even books that were written after the event, that is undisputedly after the event, make no mention of it whatsoever. Why is that? Well, because they were unaware of it. If they knew about it, surely they would have mentioned it, especially those books written after the event. It would have been an undeniable affirmation of Jesus' status as the Messiah and that he had the ability to prophesy. Okay, so now on to the second point. What do later Christian apologists say, specifically Justin Martyr, about this prophecy of Jerusalem's destruction? Justin Martyr wrote 3 books defending Christianity around the year 155 CE. They are Dialogue with Trypho, First Apology, and Second Apology. Now, Justin is attempting to argue many things in his books, but 3 that are worth highlighting here are: 1, he's trying to establish Jesus' credentials as the Messiah. 2, he's trying to convince a Jewish man called Trypho that the gift of prophesying had been moved from the Jewish nation to Christians. And 3, that the destruction of Jerusalem was prophesied in the Bible and is evidence of God's rejection of the nation. Now, if those are 3 things you want to do, isn't Jesus' prophecy about the destruction of Jerusalem something you're going to mention? He doesn't mention it once. To prove that Jesus is the Messiah, Justin quotes from Genesis, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and the Psalms. Surely Jesus' fulfilled prophecy of Jerusalem's destruction is worth a mention here. But there's nothing. Regarding the power of prophecy, he says, "For the prophetical gifts remain with us, even to the present time, and hence you ought to understand that the gifts formerly among your nation have been transferred to us." In his first apology, Justin claims that Jerusalem's destruction is evidence of God's rejection of the Jewish nation, and he says that its destruction was prophesied by Isaiah, not Jesus. Now, Justin does quote from books that he calls the memoirs of the apostles. He doesn't call any gospel by name, and that's because they hadn't been named yet. That occurred after Justin's time. But nowhere does he mention Jesus' prophecy. So this is a man who's clearly very familiar with the Bible, and yet he never mentions Jesus' prophecy about the destruction of Jerusalem. And he's writing in the middle of the 2nd century here. Now, you would imagine that if Justin was aware that Jesus predicted Jerusalem's destruction in such a precise way, that it would be the linchpin of his entire argument. And the reason for that is it addresses all of the issues he's trying to raise. It demonstrates that Jesus had the status of the Messiah because he could predict the future. It demonstrates also that the gift of prophesying has shifted from the Jewish nation to Christianity, and it demonstrates that the destruction of Jerusalem was a fulfillment of Bible prophecy and indicated the rejection of the Jewish nation by God. It addresses all of those things. So he would have spent an inordinate amount of time on this issue had he known about it, but clearly he didn't. And the reason he didn't is the same reason that the other Bible writers didn't. He was unaware of it. It did not exist yet. It had not been written down. It had not been added to these memoirs of the apostles, as he called them, to retrospectively give Jesus the status of a prophet and of the Messiah. And so it seems we have two choices here. We can believe that all of the other Bible writers and Justin Martyr, one of the major Christian apologists of the 2nd century, chose to ignore this extremely important prophecy, or the more reasonable assumption that the prophecy just didn't exist yet and it hadn't been added into the text. Whatever one of those options you think is more reasonable, I'll leave for you to decide.